After one of the worst days I've had in a while, I locked up the printing shop and headed home. My business had been a lifeline for years, but today was one of those days where everything seemed to go wrong. Broken machines, missed deliveries, clients breathing down my neck. But all of that usually melts away when I get home to Jessica and our girls, Haley and Emma. I built this life from the ground up, and until recently, it's been everything I've ever wanted. Lately, though, there's been a shift I can't quite put my finger on, especially with Jessica. When I got home that night, I walked into something that stopped me cold. Jessica was in the living room, fully dressed up, heels, a sleek black dress I hadn't seen in years, and makeup that was definitely meant to impress. She looked stunning, no doubt about it, but she was putting on a show for someone. And I had a pretty strong feeling that someone wasn't me. Going somewhere? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She barely looked up from her phone, muttering something about meeting an old friend for a quick drink. Which friend? I pressed, folding my arms as I waited. She finally looked up, but her eyes darted away almost as fast. Just someone from work. Nothing big, she said, brushing me off. And just like that, she grabbed her coat, told me not to wait up, and was out the door before I could get another word in. Not that I would have needed to. I'd already seen enough. For the first time in 15 years of marriage, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. Jessica had always been my partner. We'd built a life together, and she'd been by my side through the rough years when the business was barely staying afloat. She's a woman I thought I knew better than anyone. But the way she left without a second thought, like I didn't even factor in her plans, it set off alarm bells I couldn't ignore. The weekend didn't do much to calm me down either. Our girls were away on a camping trip with Jessica's sister, so I figured we'd have time to ourselves, maybe reconnect, catch up after all the time we'd both been wrapped up in work and routines. But Jessica acted like I barely existed. She was glued to her phone the entire time, barely muttering 2 words to me. And every time I tried to start a conversation, she'd brush me off with some excuse about needing me time. Fine, I can respect needing space, but this was something different. Her phone never left her hand, and whenever I glanced over, she'd quickly tuck it away, like she didn't want me to see who she was texting. It was clear I wasn't supposed to know, and I wasn't about to sit around and pretend I didn't see what was happening. Then there was this name, Mike. I'd heard it a few times, casually dropped into conversations when she felt like sharing the bare minimum. According to her, he was some friend from work who helped her out with a big project. The problem was the way she said his name, a little too quickly, a little too cheerfully, as if she was daring me to ask questions. And every time, she'd brush it off, as though I was just supposed to accept that she'd suddenly gained a new friend she hadn't bothered to tell me about before. By Monday, I'd had enough of this just a friend act. That night, as we sat across from each other at dinner, I didn't bother playing the polite husband. So, what's going on with you and this guy, Mike? I asked, keeping my tone steady, but making it clear I wasn't buying her story. Jessica's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, rolling her eyes in a way that only added to my irritation. Are you serious? She said, giving a little laugh that held zero humor. Mike's just a friend from work. He's been helping me with some projects, and we get along. That's all there is to it. Funny, I replied, leaning back. You never mentioned him before, and now he's popping up left and right. Jessica's face tightened. She waved it off, calling me paranoid and saying I was overreacting. But her reaction, the way she practically bristled the moment I pushed back, that told me everything I needed to know. Something was up, and she wasn't going to admit it unless I forced her hand. The next morning, as she was getting ready for work, I noticed something different. She'd spent a little extra time on her makeup, picked out a dress that hugged her just right, and even pulled out heels she hadn't worn in years. And the perfume. She was wearing a scent I didn't recognize, something strong and sweet, nothing like the scent she usually wore for special occasions. But when I mentioned it, she just shrugged, saying it was no big deal. Sure, no big deal, I muttered as she left, knowing full well this was anything but. After that morning, the wool was off my eyes. I could see her little game, clear as day. Jessica thought she was slick, but her tricks weren't fooling me. Not anymore. If she wanted to keep secrets, I'd find out what they were, whether she liked it or not. I kept my eyes open. For the next few days, I tracked her every move, waiting for the next time she slipped up. And it didn't take long. She kept her phone on her constantly, guarded it like it held the answers to the universe. Every time I walked into the room, I'd catch her glancing at the screen, locking it the second she saw me. And the makeup, the perfume, the dresses, it was like she was going out of her way to look her best for someone. And that someone sure as hell wasn't me. Then came Friday night. She walked through the door well after midnight, stifling a laugh as she kicked off her shoes and headed upstairs without so much as a greeting. I wasn't about to let that slide. "Nice night out?" I asked, my voice carrying just enough bite to make her pause on the stairs. She turned, flashing a half smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just work stuff," she said, brushing it off like it was nothing. "Funny how work has you dressing up like that," I replied, eyeing her up and down. "Who's the lucky client?" Her face tightened. "You're being ridiculous. Just because I go out for work doesn't mean I'm hiding anything." She was already starting up the stairs again, her back turned before I could even respond. "That's so," I called after her. "Then why do you act like you're guilty every time I ask?" No answer. She just kept going, shutting the bedroom door behind her. That was it. I'd given her enough chances. If she thought I was going to sit around and wait for the truth to fall in my lap, she had another thing coming. The next day, she was out for most of the afternoon, claiming she had a meeting that would probably run late. I saw my chance. I started with her nightstand, flipping through the drawers, searching for anything that might shed some light on her little meetings. And in the bottom drawer, under a stack of papers, I found a neatly folded receipt from a high-end restaurant downtown. It was dated last Thursday, one of her many late nights at the office. When Jessica got home, I was ready. "How was that project on Michigan Avenue last Thursday?" I asked, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She froze, just for a second, but recovered quickly, her expression hardening. "What are you talking about?" "This," I said, holding up the receipt. "That's one hell of a dinner bill for a late night at the office, don't you think?" Jessica's mouth tightened, and she crossed her arms, her tone icy. "I was with clients. Sometimes these things come up last minute. You know that." I didn't look away. "Sure. And I also know when someone's lying to my face." She scoffed, shaking her head. "Daniel, you're reading too much into this. It's just work. Not everything's some big conspiracy." She tried to turn the tables, acting like I was the one being unreasonable. But I could see it in her eyes. She was lying. And in that moment, any shred of trust one had left disappeared. The next morning, she left the house early, but this time, she forgot her purse in a rush. Inside was another receipt from a trendy bar across town, dated from 2 nights ago. The charges were for cocktails and appetizers. Definitely not the kind of thing she'd buy alone. When she got home, I didn't say a word, just handed her the purse and watched the guilt flash across her face as she realized her mistake. "Oh, thanks," she said quickly, glancing away. I kept my face neutral, but inside, the frustration was boiling over. Then came Sunday night. She was in the shower, her phone left charging on the nightstand. I don't know if she was slipping up or just getting cocky, but I wasn't going to let that opportunity pass. I opened her messages, and there it was, a thread of text from Mike. I didn't have to scroll far before I saw what I was looking for. It was clear from the language, playful, flirty, that they weren't just friends. The latest message read, "Last night was amazing. Can't wait for the weekend." My blood ran cold as I read it, my hands tightening around the phone. This wasn't just some passing flirtation. This was planned, deliberate, a betrayal she'd been orchestrating right under my nose. When she came out of the shower, I was still sitting there, her phone in my hand. Her face paled when she saw me, but she quickly forced a casual smile. "Everything okay?" she asked, feigning innocence. "Why don't you tell me?" I said, holding up the phone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The message on the screen was all the proof I needed. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she was searching for an excuse, but couldn't find one that would hold up. Finally, she muttered something about work texts and snatched the phone from my hand, refusing to meet my eyes. "Work texts?" I asked, my tone sharp, because it sure as hell sounds like a lot more than that. She glared at me, her face twisting in anger. "Daniel, you're being paranoid. Mike's just a friend, and if you don't trust me, That's your problem, not mine. I could feel my patience slipping. I don't trust you because you're lying to my face. And I'm done pretending that I don't see what's going on here. With that, she stormed out, slamming the door behind her. But I knew I'd hit a nerve, and I wasn't about to let this go. After that confrontation, things between us took a turn. Jessica kept up her defensive act, but I could see she was rattled. She was cautious around me, more guarded than ever, which only made me want to dig deeper. She thought she could outsmart me, that she could keep covering her tracks, but I was done letting her keep secrets. If she wanted to play this game, I was ready to play harder. A few nights later, she was out late again, supposedly with work clients. I stayed up, feeling my frustration boiling over. At around midnight, she finally strolled in, her eyes immediately darting away from mine, like she could feel the weight of my suspicion. "Good meeting?" I asked, my tone sharp. She gave me a tight smile, her eyes dull. "Yeah, just the usual." I let it slide. I'd already started gathering my own evidence, but I wanted to give her every chance to dig herself in deeper. The more she lied, the better my case. The next morning, I got a lucky break. She'd left her laptop open on the kitchen counter, and while I was grabbing my coffee, I couldn't help but glance at the screen. There was a reservation confirmation from a hotel on the north side of the city. It was booked for the upcoming weekend, just 2 nights away, under her name. The time frame and location matched up perfectly with her usual work conference excuse. When she came downstairs, I couldn't resist. "Big plans this weekend?" Jessica's face tightened as she poured her coffee, avoiding my gaze. "Just a conference. Nothing out of the ordinary." She didn't even look at me when she said it, her tone casual, like it was no big deal. But I'd seen enough. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Of course. You'll let me know if anything changes, won't you?" She gave a quick nod and slipped out the door without another word. As I watched her go, I could feel my patience wearing thin. This wasn't just about suspicion anymore. This was about taking back control. That night, she left her phone on the kitchen counter while she took a shower. I've been waiting for an opportunity like this, so I grabbed it, my heart pounding. I opened her messages with Mike, and there it was, clear as day. The two of them had been planning this weekend getaway for weeks, each message getting more and more explicit. They weren't hiding it from each other. They were only hiding it from me. "Can't wait to see you Friday night," Mike's latest message read. "Last weekend was amazing. I miss you already." A fury I hadn't felt before boiled up inside me, making my hands shake. Here I was pouring everything into our family, building a future together, and she was sneaking around with this guy behind my back. All those years, all those memories, they meant nothing to her. She was willing to throw it all away for some fling she barely tried to hide. I scrolled back further, reading each message as if they were confirmation of everything I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to believe. Jessica had practically rewritten our life together, taking parts of her day and spinning them into lies to suit her secret life with him. Everything from late nights at the office to client meetings, they were all coded messages, each one a cover for her time with Mike. By the time she came back into the kitchen, I was done pretending. I set the phone down, folding my arms as I looked up at her. "How long are you going to keep this up?" Jessica's face went pale. She looked at her phone, then back at me, but the guilty expression on her face said everything. "Daniel, I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the act." I snapped, my voice cold. "I know about the hotel. I know about the messages. I know exactly what you've been up to." She swallowed, visibly panicking, but she kept up the facade. "It's not what you think." "Oh, really?" I interrupted, crossing my arms. "Then why don't you go ahead and explain it to me, Jessica? Tell me why I've got a hotel reservation in front of me, under your name, for a weekend you told me was a work conference. Go on. Make me believe you." She opened her mouth but closed it again, clearly scrambling for some excuse, some way to wriggle out of this. But I wasn't buying it. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. I turned away, disgusted, letting her stew in her own lies. I could feel the weight of everything coming down on me. 15 years of marriage, all the sacrifices I'd made, every moment I believed we had something real, only for her to tear it apart piece by piece. The images of us as a family, All the plans we'd made for the future shattered in an instant. The worst part? I could see she didn't even have the decency to look remorseful. She was just angry at being caught. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, all those moments played through my mind. The birthdays, the anniversaries, every time I'd put her and the girls before anything else. And here she was, throwing it all away for a man I'd never even heard of until a few weeks ago. She turned our life into some kind of twisted game, lying with a straight face while I was busy breaking my back to give her everything she wanted. I realized right then and there that our marriage was over. I didn't want to spend another day trying to fix something she'd already shattered. I'd given her every chance to come clean. I'd found every receipt, read every message, stared down every lie. I'd done my best to keep it together, but now enough was enough. I was done sitting in silence while she twisted our life to suit her own betrayal. When Jessica got home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen, arms crossed, my face set like stone. She walked in, her eyes catching on my expression, and immediately I saw her tense up. For once, she looked worried. Good. It was about time. We need to talk, I said, my voice flat and cold. She gave a nervous laugh, glancing down at her phone like she was already planning her exit. About what? Can't it wait? No, Jessica, it can't. I stepped forward, blocking her path to the door. I want the truth. Now! She swallowed, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Daniel, you're being ridiculous. I don't know what you think is going on. I know exactly what's going on. I interrupted, my tone ice cold. You think I'm blind? That I haven't noticed the late nights, the perfume, the hotel reservations? Jessica's eyes darted around the room, like she was searching for a way out, but there was no escape this time. She let out a sigh, crossing her arms as if I was the one being unreasonable. I can't believe this. You're checking up on me now? Do you even hear yourself? Oh, I hear myself just fine, I shot back. But I'm done listening to your excuses. You're going to tell me the truth for once in your life, or I'm walking out that door, and I'm not coming back. Her face flushed, and for a second, she looked like she was about to argue. But then she let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping, and muttered, Fine. You want to know the truth? Yes, I've been seeing someone, but it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Not what I think? Jessica, I've read the messages. I've seen the reservations. You think I don't know exactly what's been going on? She looked away, chewing her lip, and muttered, You've been so wrapped up in your work, Daniel. Always putting in extra hours, focusing on the business. I'm home alone, night after night, wondering if you even care anymore. Oh, so this is my fault? I asked, voice rising. You think I was out there working for myself? Every hour I put in, every late night. That was for us, Jessica, for this family. While you were off with Mike, I was busy breaking my back to give you the life you wanted. She rolled her eyes, a hint of irritation breaking through. Well, maybe if you'd been around more, things would have been different. Maybe I wouldn't have needed someone else to talk to. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. Needed someone else? You're acting like this is some minor thing, Jessica. You didn't just talk to someone. You went behind my back, lied to my face, and threw everything we had away. For what? Some fling with a guy who probably doesn't even care about you the way I did. Her face hardened, and she crossed her arms defensively. I don't owe you an explanation, Daniel. I don't have to justify my choices to you. No, you don't, I replied, voice low and steady. But you do owe me the truth. After everything I've given you, everything we've built, you don't get to just walk away from this like it means nothing. Jessica shook her head, looking away. I don't know what you want me to say. It has happened. You weren't there, and I needed something. I scoffed, unable to believe the words coming out of her mouth. You needed something? And instead of talking to me, you ran off to someone else? You didn't think I deserved a chance to fix things? She sighed, frustration etched on her face. You think I wanted it to be like this? It's not that simple, Daniel. Things have been difficult. We've both been distant. Distant, I repeated, my voice rising. That's your excuse? You didn't even try to tell me something was wrong. You just went straight to Mike, lied to me, and tried to blame it on distance. Her face twisted, and she finally dropped the pretense of calm. You don't understand, Daniel. You're not the one who was left waiting at home, wondering if you even notice me anymore. I had to take care of myself because you clearly weren't interested. I could feel my patience wearing thin, the last threads of it fraying as she continued to justify her betrayal. You want to blame me? Fine. Go ahead. But don't expect me to stand here and take it. I'm done pretending this is something we can fix. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear. Daniel, I didn't mean it like that. We don't have to. We can talk about this. I didn't mean for it to get this far. Talk about what, Jessica? I snapped. You've already made it clear where your priorities lie. You didn't accidentally plan hotel weekends with someone else. You knew exactly what you were doing. She looked down, her expression turning from defiance to something like remorse, though I wasn't convinced it was genuine. I never meant to hurt you. Well, congratulations, I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. You did a hell of a job at it anyway. Silence fell between us, thick and heavy. Jessica looked like she wanted to say something, but I wasn't interested in any more of her excuses. She'd made her bed, and now she'd have to lie in it. For years, I'd been loyal, dedicated to her and our family, and she'd thrown it all away without a second thought. Daniel, can we at least talk about what happens next? She asked quietly, her voice almost pleading. I shook my head, disgusted. Next? Next, I make sure you get exactly what you deserve. Jessica's face paled as the weight of my words sank in. For the first time, she seemed to realize that there would be consequences, that this wasn't just a fling she could brush under the rug. After that last confrontation, everything shifted. For years, I'd done everything to keep Jessica happy, to make our family whole, but I realized there was nothing left to salvage. She had burned through every bit of trust, and I was finished giving her chances. This marriage was over. Now, I needed to make sure she faced the consequences. The next morning, I took the first step. I met with my lawyer, an old friend who'd known me since college, and laid everything on the table. I told him about the affair, showed him the texts I'd saved, and gave him every detail I could think of. We had signed a prenuptial agreement before marriage, Jessica's idea at the time, ironically enough, which clearly stated that in the case of infidelity, her claim to my business would be void. She'd been too careless to realize it could turn against her, and now it was going to be my strongest safeguard. My lawyer was calm and methodical, just like I needed him to be. We went through every legal step, planning out the divorce in a way that would protect me and our daughters while making it very clear that Jessica's actions were the reason for our separation. He explained how we'd lock down my assets and ensure that she couldn't make any claim on the business or any future earnings from it. And by the end of that meeting, I knew exactly what to do. Once the legal gears were set in motion, I knew the next step was to control the narrative. Jessica had always been charismatic. She had a way of making friends quickly and easily, and over the years, we'd built a network of mutual friends who saw us as a close couple. But I wasn't about to let her spin her version of the story or paint this breakup as a mutual decision. So, I began reaching out, one conversation at a time. My first call was to her closest friend, Lisa. I'd known Lisa nearly as long as I'd known Jessica, and while I never expected her to take sides, I wasn't going to let her hear a twisted version of the truth. I told her everything, from the text to the hotel stays, and left no room for ambiguity. Lisa's shock was palpable, and I could hear the disappointment in her voice as she tried to process it all. She'd thought of Jessica as family, someone she could trust, and I knew that loyalty was fractured now. Jessica's closest friend was reeling, and in a way, I felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that the betrayal wasn't just mine to bear anymore. Next, I reached out to her parents. They'd been nothing but supportive over the years. Her father had always looked at me as if he were proud that his daughter had chosen a man who could provide for her, who respected and valued her. But now, they deserved to know the truth. When I called, I could sense their hesitation, that familiar tension that comes with hearing your child's marriage is in trouble. But as I laid out the facts, a long silence settled on the line. Finally, her father spoke, his voice subdued and full of regret. Daniel, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Her mother sounded as though she'd been holding back tears, her voice shaking as she asked if there was anything they could do. I assured them it wasn't their fault, that I had things under control, and that they'd still be a part of our daughter's lives. But even they couldn't hide the disappointment and sadness. The betrayal had stretched beyond our marriage, reaching her family, who now had to bear the weight of knowing the truth about their daughter. From there, I kept going, gradually reaching out to our circle of friends. Each conversation was difficult, but each one brought a sense of justice. Friends who'd stood by us through every phase of our marriage deserved to know why it was ending. I could feel their shock, hear the disbelief as they processed the news, and by the end, there was a quiet solidarity among them. They knew the truth now, and I had no doubt that Jessica would find it much harder to keep up her lies. As the days passed, I began making more practical changes. I changed the locks on the house, ensuring she wouldn't have access to our home without my permission. I secured our bank accounts, transferring funds into accounts that only I could access. Our daughters needed stability, and I wasn't about to let Jessica's choices throw them into chaos. I also reached out to the school, preparing a letter explaining the separation to ensure that if our daughters needed support, their teachers and staff were ready to provide it. My focus was on creating an environment where they could feel safe and protected, no matter how much turmoil Jessica had brought into our lives. I didn't want them to feel abandoned or left in the dark, and I took every step I could think of to ensure they had the support they needed. In those early days, my anger drove me. Every small step, every change I made felt like a piece of armor, a layer of protection against the damage Jessica had done. I was building a shield, one that would protect me, our daughters, and the life I'd worked so hard to build. I knew the fallout was only beginning, and I wanted to make sure we were ready for whatever came next. But I wasn't done yet. With every step I took to protect our future, the anger simmering inside me found an outlet. I knew there was one last blow left to deliver, something that would expose her actions in a way she couldn't ignore. Jessica had wrecked our marriage behind closed doors, but this time, the truth wasn't going to stay hidden. I was ready to make her face it openly. A few days later, with the divorce papers finalized, I decided to serve her in the one place she'd feel the impact the most, her workplace. She'd built a reputation as an upstanding professional, someone who kept her personal life clean and separated from her work. But if she was willing to lie to me and to everyone else, then it was time for her to see the weight of her own choices front and center. That Thursday afternoon, I arrived at her office, the divorce papers sealed in a crisp manila envelope under my arm. I walked in with a calm that even surprised me. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. Jessica was going to receive the news here and now, with her colleagues and friends close enough to witness her reaction. I approached the front desk and asked the receptionist to let her know I was there. The receptionist looked slightly taken aback. Husbands don't usually show up unannounced in the middle of the workday, but she nodded and made the call. Within minutes, Jessica appeared at the end of the hall, her expression morphing from curiosity to discomfort as she realized I wasn't here for a friendly visit. She hesitated, her eyes flickering around the lobby, clearly aware that we were drawing attention. A few of her co-workers had started to glance over, sensing that something was about to unfold. "Daniel," she said in a low voice, trying to mask her nervousness. "What are you doing here?" I held out the envelope, my expression cold and unyielding. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" She stared at the envelope, and I could see the color draining from her face. She didn't need to open it to know what it contained. "Here? Now?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but I could tell she was desperate to pull us somewhere private. "Yes, here. Now," I replied, my tone steady and firm. "Since you had no problem dragging our life through the mud in secret, I figured you wouldn't mind dealing with it publicly." She glanced around, clearly aware that her co-workers were watching, and looked back at me, eyes pleading. "Daniel, please." But I wasn't here to spare her embarrassment or give her another chance to twist the truth. I wasn't about to lower my voice or take this conversation into a corner. She'd broken the trust we'd built, the marriage we'd created, and there was no going back. As she took the envelope from my hand, her fingers trembled slightly, and for a moment, I almost felt a hint of pity. Almost. Jessica's mouth opened, maybe to argue, maybe to defend herself, but I was done with words. Without another glance, I turned and left, leaving her standing there to face the reality of her choices on her own. She'd finally been handed the consequences she'd tried to escape, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For once, she was the one left to clean up the mess. Over the next few days, the ripple effect of that afternoon at her office became clear. Jessica's carefully curated image began to crumble as news of the divorce and the reasons behind it spread through our circles. Friends who'd once been sympathetic to her began to pull back, and she found herself isolated, without the allies she'd counted on. The sympathetic looks she used to get turned into judgment, and whispers of her betrayal reached every corner of her life. I'd thought seeing her go through this would bring me some kind of satisfaction, but in the end, it just brought me closure. I'd spent years bending over backward to make her happy, always working to ensure she had what she needed, always putting our family first. Now, I was focused on building a life free from her lies, free from the constant weight of betrayal. The real victory, though, was how my daughters reacted. Haley and Emma, though still young, could see the shift in our family. They understood that their mother and I weren't together anymore, though I spared them the details of what had caused the split. What mattered was that they saw I was there for them, steady and present. Jessica, on the other hand, struggled to explain her actions in a way that made sense, and I could see them instinctively turning to me for support. Slowly but surely, they began to gravitate toward me, sensing that I was the one they could depend on. In the weeks that followed, I found myself feeling lighter, as if I was finally free to focus on what mattered. I poured my energy into my daughters and my business, both of which began to thrive in ways I hadn't expected. I had always been committed to building a good life for us, but now, without the constant shadow of Jessica's betrayal hanging over me, I was seeing everything with a renewed clarity. By the time the divorce was finalized, Jessica was a shadow of the person she once was. Her reputation, her friendships, her social standing, they'd all taken a hit she couldn't recover from. Her attempts to manipulate our daughters or rewrite the story to paint herself as a victim fell flat, as more and more people came to know the full extent of her betrayal. She had no one to blame but herself, and I didn't feel a shred of pity. For years, I'd fought to build a life around her, thinking that was what a family man did. But now, with Jessica completely out of the picture, I could finally see the truth. She had been a weight I didn't realize I was carrying, a burden that kept me from seeing the possibilities for my own future. And now, with her lies and secrecy behind me, I felt stronger than I had in years. Because now, when I looked at my life, I didn't see a pile of wreckage left by her choices. I saw a second chance, a chance to rebuild, to focus on what really mattered, and to create a life centered on truth, integrity, and self-respect. With the divorce finalized and my life slowly coming back together, I thought I'd finally close the door on Jessica and her games. But as I settled into my new routine, I began to hear whispers, subtle hints that Jessica wasn't quite done trying to shift the blame. I'd known she would try to salvage her reputation, but I hadn't expected her to go so far. Friends and family began mentioning how she'd been reaching out, painting a new version of the story. In Jessica's version, our marriage hadn't fallen apart because of her betrayal, but because I'd been controlling and too focused on my business. She'd spin tales of how unhappy and lonely she had felt, casting herself as a neglected wife forced to seek comfort elsewhere. She wanted sympathy, someone to believe she'd been driven to her choices, not responsible for them. But that wasn't the worst of it. Jessica had started trying to sway our daughters, subtly planting ideas during their visits with her. She'd tell them I was distant or too busy, and hint that her actions were complicated. Haley and Emma came back confused, asking me questions that stung. "Dad, are you mad at Mom? Did you make her leave?" I could see Jessica's intentions clear as day. She was trying to rewrite the story, hoping to turn even our daughters against me. She was hoping they'd sympathize with her, maybe even resent me. But I wasn't about to let that happen. Instead of reacting with anger, I chose a different approach. I'd spent enough time fighting Jessica's lies. I wasn't going to lower myself to her level. I reached out to our friends and family again, calmly sharing my side of the story with those who asked. I didn't attack her or play into her game of blame. I simply told the truth. People had already seen enough, and I knew they'd recognize her attempts to rewrite history. Most of them didn't need convincing. They'd known me for years and could see through her act. With my daughters, I took a gentle, steady approach. I wanted them to feel they could come to me with any questions, and I answered honestly without giving away every painful detail. I made sure they knew that I would always be there for them, no matter what happened. Over time, I could see them letting go of the confusion Jessica had tried to plant. They saw me every day, felt the stability I offered, and gradually they stopped asking about her side of things. They knew who they could trust. The final turning point came when a mutual friend, someone who had once been close to Jessica, called me. He told me how Jessica's reputation had continued to spiral as her behavior became more erratic. She'd burned so many bridges in her desperate attempts to control the narrative that even her closest friends were stepping back. The more she tried to defend herself, the more people saw through her, and eventually, she'd lost nearly all her social support. For the first time, I felt a true sense of peace. Jessica's attempts to manipulate others had only backfired, and I was free of the lies that once defined my life. The truth was out, and I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. I could simply move forward, focused on the future I was building for myself and my daughters. With Jessica out of the picture, I finally felt a sense of liberation I hadn't experienced in years. I poured my energy into my daughters, helping them navigate school, sports, and life's small challenges. I invested more time in my business, growing it in ways I hadn't considered before. The weight of Jessica's betrayal no longer hung over me. Instead, I felt lighter, stronger, more determined. In the end, Jessica's last attempts to control the narrative had only reinforced my own resilience. I no longer felt bitterness or anger. I felt empowered. She had become a chapter in my past, and each day was an opportunity to write a new story, one built on honesty, integrity, and self-respect. Looking ahead, I knew there would be challenges. But with Haley and Emma by my side, and a life rebuilt from the ashes, I finally saw a future where I could thrive. Looking back on everything, I realized that Jessica's betrayal taught me lessons I never expected to learn. I'd given so much of myself to our marriage, thinking that loyalty and hard work were all we needed to build a lasting life together. But the truth was, no amount of effort or dedication could fix what Jessica had destroyed. Instead, I was forced to look inward, to understand that my own self-respect and boundaries mattered just as much as the family I was trying to hold together. As painful as this journey was, it led me to a better place. I learned to protect my peace, to stand up for myself, and to let go of anyone who didn't value me. I came to see that clinging to an illusion of happiness only left me bitter, trapped by someone else's lies. By walking away, I reclaimed a sense of freedom and purpose I hadn't felt in years. For anyone going through a similar experience, my advice is this: respect yourself enough to let go. If someone is willing to lie, betray, and undermine you, then they don't deserve your loyalty. It's hard, it hurts, but the day you choose yourself over their deceit is the day you begin to rebuild. There's strength in choosing to walk away with dignity and in focusing on the life you want to create for yourself. Today, my daughters and my work are at the center of my world, and I'm grateful for that. Haley and Emma have shown me resilience, and I know that by being the steady presence in their lives, I'm giving them the security they need. My business, too, has become more than just a source of income. It's a symbol of the life I've rebuilt. I may have lost the marriage I thought I'd keep forever, but what I've gained is so much more valuable: clarity, peace, and a future free from deception. Moving forward, I'm finally in control of my life. I know who I am, what I stand for, and what I want. Jessica's chapter is closed, and the story ahead is mine to write. One that's centered on truth, resilience, and integrity.